Welcome to Echoes of Africa, where hidden stories, bold voices, and untold truths rise from the heart of the continent. Before you dive in, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because every echo here reveals the Africa they don't want you to see. The world's most valuable metal isn't gold anymore. It's lithium, the silvery mineral that powers everything from electric vehicles to smartphones. And as the global race for clean energy accelerates, control over lithium has become the new oil war. For years, China has dominated the entire supply chain, from African mines to Asian refineries to Western car batteries. But in 2025, that dominance faces its first serious challenge, and it begins deep in Africa's soil. Across the continent, from the volcanic highlands of Ethiopia to the river valleys of Zimbabwe, lithium discoveries are redrawing the economic map. The International Energy Agency reports that African lithium reserves now account for more than one-fifth of the world's untapped supply. Until recently, most of that potential remained locked away, constrained by lack of infrastructure and financing. But over the last 2 years, a series of quiet, high-stakes deals have begun to change that picture. The most striking shift is happening along what analysts now call the Lithium Corridor, a stretch of mineral-rich territories running from Zimbabwe through Mozambique, Zambia, the DRC, and up toward Ethiopia. This corridor is quickly becoming the backbone of Africa's new energy economy. According to 2025 mining investment filings, at least $15 billion in new lithium projects have been announced in the region since late 2023, much of it funded by non-Chinese players. Zimbabwe, long known for its gold and tobacco exports, has become the focal point. It holds Africa's largest lithium reserves, with proven deposits exceeding 23 million tons. For years, Chinese companies such as Zhejiang Huayu Cobalt and Sinomine Resource Group bought into the country's mines, securing early access to critical raw materials. But now, the government has introduced new export regulations requiring that all lithium mined domestically must be processed or refined locally before export. This policy, introduced in 2024, effectively forces foreign investors, including Chinese firms, to build value-added facilities inside Zimbabwe. The result: Western and Middle Eastern investors are suddenly moving in, eager to build joint ventures that limit Chinese control. In Namibia, Andrada Mining has begun developing one of the continent's most advanced lithium tantalum processing facilities, with support from European clean energy funds. In Mozambique, the Ancuabe and Alto Lagona projects have attracted financing from South Korean and Saudi consortia. The Democratic Republic of Congo, traditionally a cobalt powerhouse, has quietly signed agreements to diversify its mineral exports, lithium included, toward Indian and Emirati buyers. The emerging pattern reveals Africa's intent to diversify away from single-country dependency. China still refines more than 70% of the world's lithium and controls nearly 60% of global battery production. But its dominance is being diluted as new refining plants appear across Africa and the Middle East. The Abu Dhabi Investment Authority and Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund have pledged over $10 billion to establish African battery material hubs linking lithium supply from Zimbabwe and Mozambique directly to Gulf processing centers, bypassing traditional Chinese channels. At the same time, Western automakers and energy companies are accelerating their push into Africa. Tesla, Volkswagen, and Stellantis have all signed exploratory agreements for supply guarantees with lithium developers in Namibia and the DRC. The European Union's Global Gateway Initiative is co-financing a Pan-African lithium transport corridor, connecting inland mines to coastal refineries and ports. A route linking Harare, Beira, and Maputo is already under survey, aimed at cutting transport costs by 40% by 2027. Behind these public deals lie even more discreet negotiations. African mining ministries are increasingly using state-backed mineral development corporations to negotiate directly with national governments rather than private intermediaries. This model mirrors the approach once used by oil exporters in the 1970s. Zimbabwe's Kavimba Mining House, for instance, now holds controlling stakes in major lithium assets and has been in quiet talks with Indian and Emirati energy consortiums for long-term offtake agreements, deals that could reshape the global battery supply chain. The effect on China is subtle but real. While Beijing remains Africa's largest trading partner, it faces a narrowing grip on strategic minerals. Several African states have begun reviewing legacy contracts signed during the 2010s under the Resources for Infrastructure model, which heavily favored Chinese firms. In 2025, Namibia and the DRC both introduced clauses requiring greater transparency and profit sharing for lithium exports. As a result, some Chinese mining companies have begun seeking joint partnerships with African and Western investors rather than full ownership. Africa's leverage is growing not just from its resources, but from timing. The global demand for lithium is expected to quadruple by 2030, driven by electric vehicles and grid storage. Europe faces a shortfall of up to 800,000 tons per year by the end of this decade. The United States is investing billions to secure alternative supply lines through the Minerals Security Partnership, MSP, an alliance including the EU, Japan, and several African nations. In early 2025, Zambia and the United States finalized a framework for joint mineral certification, the first of its kind in sub-Saharan Africa, ensuring that Zambian lithium can feed directly into Western EV manufacturing chains. Meanwhile, African governments are coordinating their strategies. The African Union's African Minerals and Energy Commission, AMREC, launched its first continental battery metal strategy in February 2025, with the explicit goal of developing local refining and manufacturing capacity. The plan envisions a network of value corridors, industrial zones along rail and port routes equipped for lithium carbonate processing, battery precursor production, and recycling. The long-term vision is to keep at least 40% of mineral value inside the continent. While this industrial pivot gains momentum, it also introduces competition. China is countering with new incentives under its Belt and Road Energy Transition Initiative, offering to co-develop African battery plants rather than merely buying raw ore. In January 2025, China's CATL announced a partnership with Ethiopia's Ministry of Mines to explore lithium refining in the Afar region. These moves reveal Beijing's adaptation. Rather than losing access, it is seeking to share equity in Africa's new downstream ecosystem. For Africa, the geopolitical payoff is enormous. The continent, once a supplier of raw materials, is becoming a gatekeeper in the clean energy economy. Control over lithium supply chains means influence over electric mobility, grid storage, and next-generation technologies, sectors that will define industrial power for the rest of the century. Analysts from the African Development Bank estimate that, if current investments hold, Africa's lithium value chain could generate over $400 billion in cumulative GDP impact by 2040. Yet the transition isn't without risk. Infrastructure gaps, policy inconsistency, and corruption remain significant barriers. Processing lithium requires stable electricity and environmental safeguards that many regions still lack. The International Finance Corporation notes that fewer than 10% of African lithium mines currently have access to renewable-powered refining systems. Ensuring sustainability is critical if the continent is to maintain long-term advantage. Several governments are now exploring green certification schemes to prove their lithium exports meet global ESG standards, aligning with European carbon border requirements. There's also the risk of geopolitical tug-of-war. The West's re-entry into Africa's mining sector after decades of absence raises questions of neo-dependency. African policymakers are cautious not to replace one dominant partner with another. The Pan-African Battery Alliance, launched in 2025 by Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Namibia, explicitly requires that all foreign investors co-own refining assets with local entities, a safeguard against extractive relationships. The Lithium Corridor, then, isn't just a line on a map. It's a new axis of global power. From Harare's industrial parks to Lusaka's export terminals, from Maputo's port cranes to Abu Dhabi's investment committees, decisions made today are reshaping the future of clean energy geopolitics. For the first time, African governments are negotiating not as resource suppliers, but as strategic partners. The mineral that once symbolized dependency is becoming the lever of independence. By the end of 2025, as new refineries come online in Mozambique and Namibia, Africa's share of the global lithium trade is projected to surpass 10%, up from barely 1% in 2020. If value-add processing expands as planned, that number could double again by 2030. The consequences for global supply chains are profound. Western automakers, Middle Eastern refiners, and Asian battery firms will all depend on African cooperation. In a world where the energy transition defines power, Africa's lithium is no longer a footnote, it's a frontier. The age of oil made empires. The age of lithium will make networks. And in those networks, the lines of influence no longer run through Washington or Beijing alone. They pass through Harare, Lusaka, and Maputo. The lithium corridor has arrived, and with it, a new map of global power. You've been watching Echoes of Africa, where every story carries the sound of tomorrow. If this moved you, subscribe now, like, and share so Africa's voice never fades into silence.